Hello everybody and welcome. This time I'm taking a first look in flight of the DCS F-5E from Belsimtek. The F-5 was designed by Edgar Schmud, whose designs many DCS players are already familiar with in the form of the P-51 Mustang and the F-86 Sabre. We'll start by looking at the exterior of the aircraft. Belsimtek are the most prolific third-party dev for DCS, so I was expecting great things. And looking at this, I am not disappointed. If the exterior is already giving you a semi, you'll blow your load when you feast your eyes on the interior. Every conceivable detail has been thought of here, from the wear and tear around the switches and panel mounts, to the way the paint has been worn down to the primer at the cockpit entrance. Right down to what I consider to be my favourite little detail, where the floor by the rudder pedals has been polished down to the bare metal through continuous use. Every switch dial and counter looks realistic and every angle looks authentic. Light and shadow interact to make the interior a thing of beauty. Even the plastic covers on the warning panel have been aged. Okay, like the Catholic priest said to the little boy, let's see what this thing does. We start over here on the right hand vertical panel by turning on the battery, followed by the left and right generators. As the generators start to spool up, we move up a little bit and turn on the left and right boost pumps. Just a quick disclaimer, this is my own startup which differs slightly from the manual, but it follows logical procedure and works perfectly. The next step is to call the ground crew and request a compressed air supply to the turbines. The first request you make on the menu is to connect. You then make a second call to the ground crew requesting that they apply compressed air to the left turbine. Now it's time to watch the left engine RPM dial and wait for it to reach 10,000 RPM. When it reaches that, press in the left engine starter switch and then lean back and set the left engine throttle to idle. You must start the left engine first, and at this point you must wait for the left engine to fully start and reach its optimal idle settings. So just watch the left engine RPM, temperature and hydraulic pressure dials to see how they should be. Anyone who has watched any of my DCS videos before knows that the first thing I always do when I have stable power is switch on the lights. Don't forget to set pitch trim depending on your loadout. See the manual. With the left engine now operating within acceptable parameters, I now contact the ground crew again and request that they apply compressed air to the right turbine. I follow the exact same procedure I followed before, wait for 10,000, press in the right starter switch, and then lean back and ease the right throttle forward to the idle position. Now I just have to sit and wait for the right engine instruments to normalize. This takes about 20 seconds. When both engines are running normally, the auxiliary intake indicator will switch and show as open. Now it's time to warm up the radar by setting it to standby. They say you should never run the radar for more than 10 minutes on the ground. However, unless you plan on having a wank, you have more than enough time to complete startup, taxi and takeoff. So rather than turning the radar off and back on again, just leave it on. When two bright horizontal bars appear in the radar scope like this, you know it has warmed up. With the radar on standby, it's now time to turn on the pitch and yaw dampers. These are an early version of the stability augmentation system. Uncage the auxiliary ADI and set it to 3 degrees below the horizon. The reason for doing this will become apparent just before our takeoff roll. Move to the main ADI and set that also to 3 degrees below the horizon, for exactly the same reason you set the auxiliary ADI. We now synchronize the altimeter with the altitude of our current airbase by setting it to 0. Turn on the heads-up display, move down and slightly right, and turn on heat to the pitot tubes. Finally, contact the ground crew and ask them to disconnect the compressed air supply.
Copy.
Make sure that the air brake switch is set to fully retracted. Then set the thumb switch for flaps to the fully automatic position, which is the rear position on the thumb switch. With the startup procedure completed, all that's left to do is close the canopy and taxi out. For some reason that I've forgotten, the left tank is loaded with more fuel than the right tank. To prevent any issues related to this, set the auto balance to the left tank. It will automatically switch back to center when it reaches equilibrium. For this flight I won't need the mirrors to remind me how gorgeous I am. Throttle up and begin to taxi out to the runway. Taxiing doesn't require very much throttle. The F-5E uses a nose-wheel steering system which is almost identical to that of the F-86. It's sensitive, So what you have to do is hold in the nose wheel steering switch and gently adjust your rudder. Whatever position you leave it at when you release the switch is the position your nose wheel will be left facing. So if you want to go straight, always center your rudder again before releasing the switch. Line up with the center of the runway, roll forward a couple of meters and bring the aircraft to a complete stop. If you're not a goldfish or haven't been felled by Alzheimer's, you may remember I alluded to the significance of setting the ADI to 3 degrees below the horizon. Well, here it is. Before your takeoff roll, you raise the nose wheel extension and, as if by magic, both ADI are now level with the horizon. Set your HSI to match the runway direction. If you didn't previously have a hand shandy, now set your radar to operate. Finally, click on the master caution light to switch it off. Push forward on both brakes to hold the aircraft in place and slowly adjust your throttle up to 95% power. When the gauges reach 95, release your brakes and begin your rollout. This aircraft is deceptively light and as a result seems to suffer from a little bit more torque during the takeoff roll than the other jet aircraft in DCS. The torque is not as strong as in the propeller aircraft, but it did catch me by surprise and I found myself having to struggle just a little bit to keep the aircraft on course down the runway. I may be wrong and this may be due to the flight model needing refinement. However, I suspect given the weight of the aircraft and the power of the engine, this is true to real life. Begin to rotate at about 145 knots IAS. Raise your landing gear once in the air and set your pitch trim for level flight. You will notice the stall warning coming on, however this will stop as soon as you're well above stall speed. I suggest increasing the throttle a little bit. Once in the air and properly trimmed, the first thing you'll notice is how agile this jet is. This jet doesn't have fly-by-wire, but it almost feels fly-by-wire. It doesn't feel like the other third generation jet, which is the MiG-21, which is much heavier and a little bit more difficult to control. You can throw this jet around the sky and it feels much closer to the Hawk Mirage or Albatross in agility. A word to the wise, this jet is in early access, so all features including the flight model are subject to change. However, at the moment it feels just amazing. It is great fun to fly, you can throw it around the sky, you can boom and zoom. It's just an amazing jet. Like every American aircraft since the Mustang, the controls are intuitive. It follows the guiding principles of American military aircraft design, which is to reduce the stress on the pilot as much as possible, at least when it comes to keeping the aircraft in the air. As you can see, I was just having great fun with this aircraft. My only real piece of advice when it comes to flying this aircraft is that the trim needs a little bit more adjustment than it does perhaps on other aircraft. Once you're mindful of that, this aircraft is extremely stable in level flight. The F-5E is fantastic for a low-level high-speed flight, but do keep in mind that it's responsive, highly responsive, almost to the point of being twitchy. It's a credit to Belsimtek that at low levels it provides the feeling of teetering on a knife edge. Another nicely modelled feature is the transonic shaking of the aircraft, because this aircraft was capable of breaking the sound barrier, as you can see here. Landing this aircraft is pretty standard fare. Reduce speed to below 260 and then drop the landing gear. Approach speed on final is about 175 knots and your touchdown speed is 155 knots. Obviously this was my very first landing and I slightly fluffed it. I came in a little bit too shallow and also my touchdown speed was a little high, so I had to rectify it by backing off on the throttle totally on touchdown and just flaring just before touchdown. Once you're rolling out in a semi-straight line after touchdown, reach across and deploy your drogue chute. This will have a dramatic effect on slowing you down. Then once you're below 100 knots, you can then use your brakes to slow down to taxi speed. I generally have mixed feelings after concluding my first flight, particularly when an aircraft's on beta. However, this time I can safely say that Belsimtek have knocked the ball right out of the park. I do realise it's still on beta and there are some features left to be implemented, and I'm sure there are a few tweaks required. But this is just amazing for a first day beta aircraft. All that's left for me to say is thank you very much for watching, and please don't forget to dislike, tell me to go fuck myself, or subscribe below. Thank you very much, and goodbye.